Doug has a particular interest in FASD, Indigenous health, child development and learning problems, obesity, and leadership versus management and how to do better. In 2013-2014, Doug was the recipient of a Churchill Fellowship and travelled to Canada, the US and New Zealand to understand how to build a comprehensive assessment and intervention service for children with FASD. Doug was born in rural New South Wales and raised on a farm. He attended a one-room bush school with a single teacher who lived with the parents. He was involved in numerous Aboriginal communities as a child and established outreach clinics to Aboriginal communities on commencing paediatric practice, which he continues to this day. Doug is the clinical director for women's, newborns and children's health on the Gold Coast with an annual budget of $114 million and 545 full-time staff. So welcome, Doug.
So thanks, Karen, and thank you to the Victorian FASD Special Interest Group for the invitation to speak today. Karen's really asked me about how and why we have a clinic on the Gold Coast, and I'm going to also talk about some of the barriers that were associated with building up this service. So for those of you who don't know the Gold Coast, there it is on a beautiful Queensland sunny day. Beautiful one day, perfect the next. And just a bit of demographics about the Gold Coast. We have 13 million visitors per year, so most of the people in our children's ward are actually on holidays. We have 12,500 new residents per year, and we have 300 days of sunshine. And not only that, as well as theme parks, we now also have trams. So you guys aren't the only people in Australia that have a tram network. Down the bottom, there's a picture of one of the theme parks, a picture of the Gold Coast tram, and a picture of the Gold Coast University Hospital, which is a shining new $2 billion concrete monolith. Okay, so in terms of this presentation is really on behalf of my team. As you can see, there are quite a number of them. Many of them work part-time, so I don't want you to think that that entire group is full-time involved in FASD. And the asterisk there next to Robin Plowman, she's the only person who's actually left our team since we first started in FASD back in about 2012. So our retention is extraordinary, and I think FASD is the glue that binds the team together. So, why start a clinic? Particularly when we started this clinic in the context of a pre-existing child development service, we had no extra money to start this service. So in order to start a service with no extra money, you have to stop doing something else. So we made the decision to stop doing something else in order to do FASD. So it is possible to start a clinic without any money. We are proof of that. Why? As part of my role, I conducted a general paediatric clinic within the hospital, and that means that any type of patient can come in the door. And one day, this little lady came in the door with 2 foster children, and after exchanging pleasantries, I said, "What are you here for today? How can I help you?" And she said, "These 2 children," and this was with a large amount of conviction and determination, "these 2 children have fetal alcohol effects." And that was old terminology, but I said at the time, "What's that?" Because I had no clue as to what she was talking about. Because when I was trained, it was fetal alcohol syndrome or nothing. You either had all three facial features and cognitive impairment in the context of prenatal alcohol exposure, or you were fine. So the idea that there was something less than that, a spectrum, was completely new news to me. So when she first said that, I sort of did the mental eye roll, like, yep, okay, we've got a live one here. But she was so persistent and dogged and tenacious and so extraordinarily well armed with facts. She had been to international conferences that I had never heard of. And so she very persistently, sort of like one of those old grandmas that grabs you by the nose and leads you around, she led me by the nose to the belief that FASD was a real thing and it was something that I, as a paediatrician, needed to be interested in. And so that's where the journey started for us. Whoops, now we've got that issue again. Okay, and once I began to explore a little bit about FASD in my ignorance, what I came across were statements like this. This is from a prominent psychiatrist, child psychiatrist in the US. And this is really a stinging criticism of existing diagnostic services. And it says that all the people that normally deal with children in this space are really coming up with half-formulated diagnoses like ADHD, bipolar disorder, or developmental disorder of childhood. And they are blind to the umbrella diagnosis of FASD, which implies there are problems that are much more global and much more affecting much more of the child's brain than perhaps the original diagnoses suggest. And then, this is a bit later data, but looking at 156 children who were subsequently diagnosed with FASD and looking back to see what had happened beforehand. And 86.5 of them had either never been diagnosed with FASD or they had been misdiagnosed. So I started to wonder, well, what makes the difference? And I think the difference is made by having the courage to ask carefully and respectfully and in a non-judgmental, non-blaming way about alcohol use in pregnancy. And we know from Evie's earlier presentation that 97% of women want to be asked about alcohol in pregnancy. So we as clinicians have been doing something wrong by not asking or not asking well enough in order to elicit the history. So I started asking about PAE, prenatal alcohol exposure, just in general paediatric clinics. And it was then that I realised how many of the children that I had seen in the past 14 or 19 years that may have had prenatal alcohol exposure or FASD as part of their presentation that I had missed. And once you come to that realisation, you can't actually slam the door again. You can't go back to not asking, and you can't go back to not asking properly. And what I mean by properly is that when I was trained, I was taught about the importance of asking about exposure to substances during pregnancy, but it was more along the lines of, now, you didn't drink during pregnancy, did you? And, okay, next question, tick that one off. And so when I say asking properly, I mean these three questions. So and they allude to some of the earlier presentations about the percentage of pregnancies planned in Australia versus not planned. So the first question is, was a pregnancy planned or not planned? And we know that 30, 40, 50% of pregnancies aren't planned in Australia, so that should be a high hit rate. And the reason you ask that question is because if someone's not planning to get pregnant, then they're probably not monitoring their alcohol intake, even though they may have the best intentions to do so if they were pregnant. And the next question was when was the pregnancy discovered? So how many weeks down the track did you realise that you were pregnant? And then the third question is what lifestyle changes were made on the discovery of pregnancy? Now, people often look blankly at you there, but it's a segue into, well, I want to know about cigarettes. Did you smoke cigarettes? I want to know about alcohol. I want to know about taking antenatal vitamins. I want to know about seeing your GP, avoiding soft cheeses, processed meats. So the question about alcohol should just be embedded in the normal history taking. And then it gives the mum an opportunity to say, well, I drank or smoked until I found out I was pregnant and then I stopped. Well, that's fantastic, but it does allow you to get a dose frequency equation prior to the discovery of pregnancy. Okay? And most mums will tell us, I didn't drink in pregnancy. Well, what they mean is that as soon as they discovered they were pregnant, they stopped drinking. Yeah? The other option, either together with or instead of, is to use something called the Audit C, which is a 3-item questionnaire which gives dose and an overall ranking. So it just depends on personal preference. So once I started asking those questions, then we realised we needed to learn more about FASD. And with help from Karen was there right at the start with her colleague Valerie McGinn because they happened to be here in Melbourne at a conference, and so we flew them to the Gold Coast. Now, after a year or two of agitation, Queensland Health came to the party and they paid for 7 of us to go to Vancouver because, to my shock, there was nowhere in Australia where anyone could get training in FASD at that time. So we finished that training in December 2013. We opened a clinic in Feb 2014, and we started a training course for Australian clinicians in May 2014. And since then, we've put about 250 people through that course, some of whom are in this room. Up until that point, we had no extra funding, so we ran this clinic for nearly 4 years with no extra money until Queensland Health came to the party and funded us in 2017, but the rubber didn't hit the road until April of this year. So we now have an additional $1 million a year recurrent to run this service, which is significant, and we've also been the beneficiaries of 2 research grants totaling $3 million over about 3 years. So we had to do stuff with no money in order to get there though, so it wasn't something that just landed in our lap. So in that clinical space, who have we seen? When we first opened this clinic, the board of the Gold Coast Hospital and Health Service realised that it was the only funded clinic in Australia, and they thought it was unethical to limit patients to the Gold Coast Health Service District or indeed Queensland. So that was incredibly supportive. So we've seen people in the clinic from all states except Western Australia. 75% of them have been non-Indigenous, and a significant proportion are from the white middle class. And in most of those situations, the exposure is either inadvertent, as I alluded to before, where drinking ceased immediately on the discovery of pregnancy, or perhaps they had an alcohol use disorder. But as Evie mentioned earlier, there are a number of families we see that have very high incomes and a level of tertiary education. So the point of me putting that in is to emphasise that prenatal alcohol exposure doesn't distinguish on the basis of income, education, class, colour or creed. Oops, I've lost it again. Okay, now I want to talk about some myths and barriers. So there are some developmental sacred cows in child development. The developmental sacred cows are that etiology means cause, so the cause of the problem doesn't matter. So in child development, you take the child as you see them, and then we have a big emphasis on early identification and early intervention. And to a certain extent, we believe that early intervention has the potential to fix everything, and that many developmental conditions tend to improve over time anyway. Now, I can tell you that FASD has the potential to completely disprove nearly all these things. Okay? And so, the most important thing that we need to know when we're doing FASD assessment is not necessarily whether they meet the diagnostic criteria, but we want to understand how the child's brain works. Okay, because if we don't understand how the child's brain works, we can't really put in a plan to assist them into the future. Okay, guilt. So one of our registrars went for a job in another hospital and was interviewed by a paediatrician. He said, "Oh, you work for that guy who makes mothers feel guilty by asking about alcohol." Now, luckily, because she'd worked with us, she was able to shoot him down in about 30 seconds. You only have to ask parents. So, parents say things to us like this: don't be afraid to ask. Don't do it accusingly. Don't judge the mother by making her feel guilty or blaming or shaming. So it's important in any clinic there must be this absolutely overt culture of non-judgment, no blame, no shame, soft leading, opportunities to build trust and build rapport. And this other one, yes, we do feel guilty. We felt guilty before you asked, and we'll feel guilty after you ask. But don't you worry about it, because it's our guilt. We'll cope with it and we'll get on with it. Okay, what a powerful statement that is. Don't you as a clinician take on our guilt and use that as an excuse not to ask. For me, the guilt was associated with parenting in a punishment consequences style. The guilt was that I had contributed to his anxiety and depression. And then the last comment about grief. I grieved letting go of the hopes and dreams I held for my son. I had to redefine what success looked like for him. Without that diagnosis, we'd still be on the battlefield of must try harder, must do better, go and do another parenting course, because that's our default. When something doesn't work, we fall into the trap of blaming the parents. Okay, the next barrier is diagnosis doesn't get you anything, so why bother? In Queensland, Education Queensland has the magic 6 categories. And they're basically from the bottom up: blindness, deafness, missing a limb, speech language impairment, autism, and ID. So you can see FASD isn't on the list, though some of the things that fit under the umbrella of FASD may well be included, particularly the top 3. It's important to realise that for children under the age of 7, the NDIS, FASD is in what's called List C. Okay, so if you can prove that they have FASD under the age of 7, that's almost an automatic yes to NDIS. Over the age of 7, we have to provide additional information about functional impairment. Okay, NDIS is part of List C, and so for the kids older than the age of 7, how do you provide the evidence of functional impairment? And that goes back to understanding with a good assessment how the child's brain works across those 10 brain domains that have been defined in the Australian Guide to the Diagnosis of FASD that Karen mentioned in her first presentation. So we look at all those brain domains and then convert them into a very comprehensive but easily readable report, a section of which is written in NDIS speak. And so the feedback that we get from schools about our reports are there. So I'm just giving you direct quotes. Incredibly detailed, excellent clarity on student strengths. These work together to create a picture of the whole child. We use this in detail to create personalised learning plans so we're on the same page to ensure the student's flourishing. As a principal, I would like this kind of report for all students accessing health services. Okay, so whilst a report takes us a lot of time and a lot of hours, the feedback like this has meant that we think it's something worthwhile persisting with. Okay, and then if professionals don't think the diagnosis gets you anything, do parents think the diagnosis gets you anything? And again, diagnosis sent us on a learning journey. And the singular emotion in the room when we tell a biological parent, a foster parent, or an adoptive parent that their child has FASD is usually one of relief, which might surprise you. Because the day we received that, we also received confirmation that we weren't the world's worst parents. And this one, we've had no further contact with the police because they're now managing their child in a way that was different to previous. It's allowed us to put things in place to work out how to gain success and what that looks like for us. It gave us an explanation of the challenges we were facing as a family. Up until that time, we had really no idea what was going on. Okay, and just to really emphasise that, it wasn't that he was the problem, it was that his brain was different due to FASD. It wasn't that he was choosing to be naughty, so when we see bad behaviour in schools, the default is to assume it's because the child's naughty and they get plugged into the suspension expulsion pathway. So just getting across that a child is not willfully choosing to misbehave, it's because he has a brain injury, can be immensely powerful. Okay. Do FASD services cost too much? It takes us between 30 and 50 hours of time for a single child. That seems like a lot, doesn't it? But an MRI of a child's brain under a general anaesthetic costs more than the entire neuropsychological workup for one child with FASD. And I can tell you in our hospital on the Gold Coast, there are 6 of those children seen every week. And until recently, we saw 2 FASD children per month. Okay? They're both looking at the brain. The MRI is usually looking at structure, and our psychometric workup is looking at function. And the real question is probably, doesn't FASD cost us a lot as a service? It's what does FASD cost Australia? And unfortunately, like many things to do with FASD, there's no Australian data, so we've got to extrapolate. So our Kiwi colleagues, again, as well as having the All Blacks, they're also exceedingly good at FASD. And they calculated that FASD costs between 0.03 and 0.09% of their GDP. But that was the cost of lost opportunity, the cost of not having a job that paid as well, the cost of being unemployed. Okay, it didn't include the cost of education, health or justice. And when they estimated how much that would add to it, it brought it really to 0.36% of New Zealand GDP. So the range is 0.03 to 0.36. So what if we applied those numbers to the Australian GDP of $1.56 trillion? And you get those two numbers at the bottom that potentially it could be as little as $468 million. Is there anybody here that wouldn't like $468 million to run a service? or as much as $7.25 billion. Now, they're really rubbery figures, and we've got extrapolation on extrapolation, but the point of it is to show that it's most unlikely that FASD doesn't cost the Australian economy a lot of money. Okay, the next barrier is ignorance. So I've had some parents come to me and say they went to see a doctor of unknown brand who said, well, I don't believe in FASD. And that was pretty much where the conversation stopped. Now, I don't think there's too many doctors that if a child went in with a fever and a seizure and a stiff neck, that they would say, oh, sorry, I don't believe in meningitis. Okay, so it's just conceptually odd. It doesn't pass the logic test. And then again, if we look to what our parents say, our parent knows when something's wrong with our child, so listen. We come to you as professionals hoping that you know more than us. Now that mum came to me and I didn't know more than she did at the start. Okay? Prioritisation. There's too much other important work that we have to do in order to be able to do FASD. Unfortunately, FASD is already in everyone's caseloads. It doesn't matter whether you work across paediatrics or juvenile justice. We saw the Banksia-Hill study, 36% had FASD. The stat that Jane didn't put up is that 90% of them had a neurodevelopmental impairment in at least one domain. So 90% of the kids in Banksia-Hill detention centre had brains that didn't work properly. Okay, and so in my service from 2000 to 2014, we diagnosed one case of FASD, and that was blindingly obvious, but even then I almost missed it. Okay, and from 2014 to the present, for 3 years of that with no money, we've diagnosed more than 100 and we're still counting. Okay, there's another myth that FASD needs to be, services need to be special or specialised. That means they need to be in a single place and everybody needs to come to us. Now thankfully, because of the Cheverton why not model, okay, you guys are already moving away from that and we need to congratulate those guys for that. I think that GPs and psychologists should be as good at FASD as they currently are at type 2 diabetes and anxiety, respectively. Everybody needs to know about this, and everybody needs to know how to either make the diagnosis or at least contribute to the diagnosis, and then what to do afterwards. In Canada, in the FASD conference a couple of years ago, they calculated that the world needed an extra, I think it was 3,500 multidisciplinary diagnostic teams in order just to keep pace with new diagnoses. So plainly, the model that we are using, the sort of gold standard model, needs to change. Okay, is FASD just an Indigenous problem? Now most of you probably know the answer to this, but you can work this out with simple mathematics. If we look at James Fitzpatrick's study, which Jane alluded to in her earlier presentation, his prevalence rate was about 12% using old terminology of partial fetal alcohol syndrome and fetal alcohol syndrome. That's now no longer used. But let's say that we just said that for FASD in the Indigenous community, the prevalence rate was 20%. And we multiply that by the Indigenous population in Australia, you end up with about 134,000 Indigenous people with FASD. On the other hand, if we apply a 2% prevalence rate to the non-Indigenous population, we end up with 462,000, let alone a higher prevalence rate of 5%. So clearly, just in terms of numbers, this is a problem that affects all strata of Australian society. And the other criticism I hear is that there's no specific intervention. Okay, now I want you to tell me what is the specific intervention for global developmental delay or intellectual disability or autism. I just want one specific intervention, guaranteed winner, killer app. Okay? And the answer is that there isn't one. Okay? And so, does that mean that we should stop diagnosing those conditions? Are indeed specific interventions for FASD, but most of the time we should be looking at matching the expectations of the child to suit their ability, and it should be very much an ecological approach. And the last thing I wanted to bring up was child development services in Victoria, which is somewhat surprising because I actually counted around the country, and I think I got sick of counting when I got to about 73 child development services. And they're certainly not equitably distributed. Western Australia probably has the best because they have 11 teams in Perth and they have 240 full-time equivalents for a population of 2.4 million. But I think Katrina's team in Melbourne is the only one, perhaps with the addition, I don't know whether Shepparton you're a child development service or you started an FASD service. But certainly Victoria seems to have a different model, and there's by no means as many red dots in Victoria as there are in other states. So, requirements for new services, and I think Shepparton illustrated this beautifully. What do you need? You need some enthusiasm and you need some mates. Okay? And ideally, if your mates happen to be psychologists or speech pathologists, and a doctor, then you're good to go. Yeah? And it can be virtual, it can be telehealth, you can adopt the James Fitzpatrick fly-in model, and those people will slowly become upskilled until they're able to do it in the absence of the fly-in, fly-out people. Okay, money is optional, and I hope that Shepparton and the Gold Coast have proven that. So, in summary, we've talked about the why we have a child development service, we've talked about who we've seen, we've talked about how we've done it, we've talked about asking about alcohol, we've talked about myths and barriers, and I've given you some clue as to how to start. And so my final slide is this one. Thank you.
In 2005, Anne published her first book, Alcohol and Pregnancy, A Mother's Responsible Disturbance. I believe there's a new, recently updated copy of that, Anne. And in 2007, Anne established the Russell Family Fetal Alcohol Disorders Association, which Prue put up some details about, to pay homage to her children, her family and friends, and to provide support to the parents and carers who were not able to access support in their local community. In 2009, she developed the first publicly available training on FASD, and in 2012 she was the finalist at the Australian of the Year Awards. Anne is an experienced public speaker, and you may have seen her on various television programs and on radio. She's a consultant for a number of large-scale FASD projects and government committees. So thanks, Anne, for coming. And Anne's flying down from Queensland to be with us today. Next we have Kelly, who's in the blue. Kelly is a permanent carer for twin girls, aged 10, who were diagnosed with FASD in 2017. Prior to being placed with Kelly in 2012, the original cause of the girls' developmental delay was attributed to trauma. As the girls underwent further assessments, both girls were diagnosed with an intellectual disability, with the possibility of an organic cause being chromosomal. It wasn't until 2016, watching the Four Corners episode on FASD, that the pieces fell together for Kelly, and she started to talk to health professionals about FASD. Kelly finally saw a diagnosis from the Gold Coast Clinic with Doug, after a lack of understanding within the current Victorian health system. Thanks, Kelly. We have in yellow. Prue is a social worker with a background in child protection who manages an adoption and permanent care program, and she works part-time as an FASD consultant. While working for the Northern Territory Child Protection, Prue became interested in FASD and undertook a Churchill Fellowship in 2009, visiting the US and Canada to investigate the models of care for children with FASD. And since then, she's developed and delivered training in the Northern Territory, Queensland and Victoria. Prue focuses on supporting professionals to learn about FASD with the aim of bringing an FASD lens to practice and ultimately adapting the service to better meet the needs of children and young people and families. In her current role, Prue advocates for improved screening and diagnosis of children with prenatal alcohol exposure who are being placed through permanent care or adoption, and hopes to develop better supports for carers. One question for all of the panel members, and then we're going to open up questions to the audience. So the first question for Anne is, Anne, your boys were diagnosed as adolescents at a time when there are few or any services actually in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and the difference that diagnosis made for you?
Yes, Karen. I knew there was something different about my boys, particularly my youngest son, for a long time. He was diagnosed with ADHD when he was 13. So once I got that diagnosis, I thought that we found the problem, but he had behaviours that were outside of that condition. So when I discovered that FASD existed, I just knew straight away that's what he had. So it was a sort of a journey of trying to find doctors, paediatricians. Well, actually, I only got to one paediatrician. It was mainly trying to get through the GPs. So there was no real understanding. One doctor said, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" At the time, my son was suicidal. He didn't know what was wrong with him. I didn't know what was wrong with him. In fact, there were all these different sort of things, so many different issues that I thought that he had like 5 or 6 conditions. So I guess it was a relief in a way to know that the etiology was, well, the reason for these behaviours was one condition. And it was really good for him to know that it was not who he was, it was because of a brain injury that he was behaving that way. So a diagnosis was absolutely, well, an understanding, because we didn't get a diagnosis for about another 2 years. I went to Canada and met Dr. Sterling Clarence, who diagnosed my boys. But understanding that they had a brain injury and that their behaviours weren't because they were naughty kids or because I wasn't parenting correctly or something was an unbelievable relief in many ways. Of course, it caused a whole heap of other issues, but like the slide that Doug had, yes, we feel guilt and it's not going to go away, but what every mother wants is what's best for her child, and what's best for her child is to be diagnosed and then supported in the best way possible.
Thanks, Anne. So, Kelly, your twin girls have a diagnosis of FASD. What difference did that make for you and your family?
Well, I'd just like to exactly echo what Anne has mentioned. It's that sense of relief, and as a mum, when you know better, you do better. So it gives you more in your toolkit. And it's so emotional seeing Doug here today, because the last time I saw Doug, he effectively just changed my life. So, can you hear me? Is that on? So what the diagnosis did was it gave me clarity and context, but it also gave me a roadmap. And I think that that's the critical nature. It's diagnosis and a treatment plan and a really clear way, which is what Doug explained so beautifully, is a very clear way of how to step forward across the lifespan. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Is this on or do I pass?
Rude. So, Prue, I often have professionals say to me that diagnosis is just a label and that you need to treat the patient based on their functioning. You work with children who are often prenatally exposed to alcohol and who are often about to enter the care system, and you work with carers. Does diagnosis make a difference, do you think, in your work?
Look, I think it makes a big difference, because if you think about a child in the care system who's got a speech delay and some social issues at school, they're not making friends, they're getting into trouble a lot, and their motor skills aren't great, you can treat all of those things. You can do speech therapy, you can get them to the OT and the physio, and you can put them in a social skills group, but it's not the whole picture. And I think if you then said, okay, well, actually that child's got autism, you go, we're on the autism spectrum, so I go, oh, now I can start to predict what else they might struggle with in life. And it's exactly the same with FASD. Once you know it's FASD, you can go, okay, so actually that explains the sleeping and the sensory issues and why they take an hour to eat breakfast. It's not just that they're, naughty, because these kids get labelled naughty. And it also allows then the carer or parent gets the power to understand the diagnosis and explain it to others. So they can then say, what you see in the school is a symptom of FASD, and I need to educate you about that. I need you to get that knowledge, because without that knowledge, you're going to be telling me, I think your child is actually a bit more capable than what you think they are. And I worked with one parent who said, I'm now proud to be a helicopter parent because my child needs helicopter parenting. Without me hovering over her, she has social failures every day. And that is going to impact on her mental health through life. The other thing I think, working in adoption and permanent care, when I started in that sector, we were placing kids with prenatal alcohol exposure all the time without a diagnosis. And because I had an interest in the area, I came and I said, we need these carers to be really prepared. And I would read these carer assessments that would say the carers don't really want a child with a developmental disability, but they're okay with FASD. I'm like, they don't know about FASD. And I still read that. And so now what we've moved from is placing children so they've got some developmental issues, but it could be trauma, it could be early neglect, we're not really sure. Good quality care should help a lot, to saying this child is at very high risk of FASD. They're too young to be diagnosed at 2 or 3 months of age, but we want a carer who knows about FASD before we place the child. We want you to be up for the journey and be prepared, and that child will have the best outcome.